Hello everyone, it's Sylvia from Fella Tarot. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to start a VR, perhaps a VR challenge. I'm going to call it like that, in the sense that personally I really love watching VRs on YouTube, especially on TarotTube. But lately there hasn't been that many. I don't know if it's just me, perhaps, I don't know where to look, or perhaps the channels that I'm actually following are not really taking up on VRs. But I think that it's a really nice way to connect everyone. And so this is a challenge in the sense that at the end of the video, I'm going to propose a few of the channels that I watch, that I follow, to take up on this VR, only if they feel like it, because I remember there used to be these challenges on Facebook, and I used to hate them whenever I was nominated, because sometimes I just didn't want to do that. I just liked to have a look at what the others were doing or were choosing. Perhaps you remember the ones with the photos, the photo challenge and stuff like that. So this is absolutely not a challenge in the sense that I nominate you and you have to do it, but I'm just, inviting you. I will tag you at the end of the video, and I'm just inviting you to have a look, and if you feel like it, you can join in. It will be so much fun, or at least I hope it will be. So because we are in the spooky season, and I just really love it, and I love the way Australia is actually embracing the spooky season this year, after years in which, it was not necessary. It was just, let's say, it was just something for kids, whereas right now it's actually thought to be something that brings a lot of fun for adults as well. And I'm in several groups and WhatsApp chats and stuff like that, and everyone is, saying, oh, tonight I'm going to watch this movie, or I'm going to watch this movie. There's movie theaters that are proposing older movies that, were beloved horror movies in our time, so in the 90s, or even 80s, or even older than that. Some movies are always really exciting to watch, and some of the movies, theaters where we go to, representing some of the horror classics, and that gave me the idea. So basically this VR is called #BelovedMonstersDecks. So for each and every one of our beloved monsters, that can come from a movie or also from a book, I have actually tried to understand what the feature and the theme of that monster is, and I have tried to pair up a deck that could very much represent that, either movie or book, but in any case, that beloved monster that comes from the our childhood, basically. So let's have a look. So the first beloved monster deck is the Frankenstein. The Frankenstein is a collage deck that is misunderstood, but has a heart of gold. And for this one, I've actually chosen the Rosebud Tarot. The Rosebud Tarot, this is the mass market edition, and perhaps that's part of the reason why I feel like this deck is actually misunderstood, because lately there's been a lot of talk about how the indie version of this deck was, let's say, it was a more valuable edition because of the linen cardstock perhaps, but also because of the backs being slightly different. There was a different, artwork on the back. And I've heard a lot of people complaining that they received the deck with a bit of a bow, like this one, for example. I don't necessarily mind it, because I still work very well with this deck. I don't really find that the bow is affecting my shuffling, or let's say when I lay down the cards, for example, they do tend to curl up at the edges, but not in a way that, it's really unpleasant aesthetically. And when it gets to that stage, when a deck is as warped as they get, and that's quite annoying, and I get that. But this is, to me, that is definitely what a collage deck that is misunderstood for those reasons is. But it's also got a heart of gold, and I'm referring to I'm pretty sure everyone has watched Frankenstein, and there's probably been a couple of different versions of that story. And we all know what it's about. Frankenstein is basically a collage, because it's made out of parts of different corpses. So obviously it's the epitome of collages. And I feel that it's really misunderstood, because I don't know if you remember many scenes in which he's actually being, even hit with stones by the villagers that don't understand that he's just like a baby, but he looks like a monster, because obviously he's aesthetically not necessarily safe. That it doesn't look like someone who could be kind. Let's say it looks like someone who could actually, kill you. So because of that, of course, because of the aesthetics, because of its looks, the villagers are against it, and they try and set fire to him. They chase him away and everything. But I do believe there is a scene in the movie itself, and also in the story, where he's actually picking up flowers with a little girl. And because the little girl doesn't have the same reaction as the villagers, because the villagers, of course, are adults, whereas, the juxtaposition is between the innocence of the child and the corruption of the adults. And of course, well presented with innocence, Frankenstein actually is a companionable friend. So he's picking flowers with a little girl. Of course, then, we all know how it ends. So it's not necessarily a happy ending. But I really do believe that, it is a beloved monster in our, whether you watched it when you were a child or a teenager, or whether you're watching it for the first time now, and any kind of version of the movie you watch. There's even a parody of the movie with Mel Brooks, directed by Mel Brooks. And I remember it was one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. And unfortunately, I've even searched for it in my streaming services, but I couldn't really find it, which is a pity, because it's a movie that I recommend to anyone. And that was one of the very few times in which I actually think that the Italian version, so in Italy, we don't have subtitles. In Italy, they actually dub the voices of, any kind of foreign movie. So in some cases, because the dubbing is an art, and you really need to find a word that looks like the person whenever the camera is pointing at the person, for example. You need to find the word in Italian, the corresponding word in Italian, that actually looks like it. This is exactly what the character, the actor is saying with their lips. Because otherwise there is there's a disconnect. You're watching this and perhaps the lips say something like yes, but the word is see, which doesn't look exactly the same. So it is an art. It's very difficult to do that. Now, I remember there is that version in Italian, and I watched it the first time in Italian, of course, because I was very little when I watched it, and it was absolutely hilarious. And I remember watching it in English, the original in English, and I was very disappointed, because believe it or not, the Italian version is a lot funnier. So anyway, this is the Frankenstein, so a collage deck that is misunderstood but has a heart of gold, and this is the Rosebud Tarot. So the next beloved monster deck is the Dracula, a deck that is sensual and sophisticated. And this may be a little bit of a surprise, but I've actually chosen the Mises Tarot by Helena Elias, Guidance from the Greek Gods. This is a very recent publication by Rockpool. I actually grabbed a copy at the Rockpool stand at the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival in Sydney. And the reason why I think this is kind of a surprise is because when we talk about Dracula, we probably think about something very dark, because of course vampires cannot stay, outside in the light, because otherwise they burst out in flames. And this deck is all love and light. However, let me just say something. This deck is very, and you'll see it when I show it to you, it is very sensual, and it's also very, very sophisticated. So when I thought about the principal characteristics that we associate with Dracula, and if you think about all of the movies, but also I'm not just referring to the actual Dracula by Bram Stoker, I'm talking about any kind of vampire theme. Well, no, perhaps not all of them, but the majority of them, they present vampires as very beautiful people, really beautiful, always young, always perfect, with absolutely no physical flaws. Their aesthetics are very refined, almost I want to say noble, as in, you know, like aristocratic and very sophisticated. And this is absolutely what this deck is. So every single card is very sensual, is very seductive, suggestive. It's one of those decks that you either like it or you hate it. But me being me, at the beginning, I actually did not like it, because I found that in many cases, if you were focusing on the cards themselves, the meaning of the card, and you were looking for the meaning of the card on the symbols and the images on the cards, you could not find them. Well, apart from some cases, for sure, this is obviously very beautiful for a Nine of Swords. But what I mean is with that is that every single character is actually very seductive, is very sensual. And I really think that whenever we look at modern refiguration of Dracula or vampires, they actually look like this. They look like super beautiful, super perfect, model-like people, and very sophisticated and always dressed perfectly, you know, because, and it's always something that it's a common theme, like they've been living forever, so they amassed immense amount of fortune, so they have a lot of money, so they have a lot of really great taste when they dress. For example, their houses are really beautiful because they inherited a mansion, you know, and so they have these castles that will cost $30 million to buy nowadays, but you know, back then they even built them. So this is what this deck is actually reminding me of. I think that even though there is a lot of love and light coming out of these figures, on the other hand, the sophistication and the sensuality of the figures themselves really brings me back to the concept of Dracula. So this is the Dracula, a deck that is sensual and sophisticated, and this is the Mythos Tarot. And the next one is the Werewolf, a deck that is best used on a full moon. And I just decided to go with the New Moon Tarot by Pixel Occult. This is one of my cyberpunk decks, and it's an absolute favorite. I really love everything about this deck. I even really enjoyed the guidebook, because it is actually based on the deck and not just on the general meanings of the cards, which I find very great. And there's, you know, all about these sentences or quotes on the cards for each and every card. There's also the reversed meaning of the card, which is kind of useful if you read reversals, because it does have the same kind of structure. So you not only have, for example, the title of the card and also the keywords, but the sentences for the upright and the inverted meaning. So I really enjoy this deck. One of my favorite artists, Pixel Occult. The decks produced by these artists are just absolutely fantastic, and I wish I had them all, but I'm slowly building up on my collection. It's difficult to get them here in Australia, but there is Crystal and Mona Maya in New Zealand that actually stocks them, or used to at least, whenever, because some of these decks are actually out of print, but then they bring reprinted, so you can also keep up if you want to. There's the New Moon. There was a Kickstarter campaign for a Lenormand deck, which I didn't back. I don't know why, because I should have. And I'm seeing on feeds on Instagram now. Sorry, I'm trying not to catch the light. And it is really beautiful. Even pairing it up with a tarot, which is something that I don't tend to do. I don't generally pair up a tarot and a Lenormand deck, but you can do that if it works. And it's just really beautiful. I just love the combination of these 4 or 5 colors, but it just works. And as I said, it's one of my cyberpunk decks, one of my favorite cyberpunk decks, and I have a few. And it reminds me so much of the 90s, and that's the reason why I chose it for a werewolf, because, you know, it does have that kind of 90s atmosphere, and it also does have that kind of moonlight atmosphere. So if you notice, not that the moonlight is pink, full pink, but this looks exactly as if there would have been a neon light coming out of the moon, and that's the reason why it's called the Neon Moon Tarot. And so I actually found that when it's full moon, this deck is absolutely superb to use. It just really puts you in the mood. It gives you that kind of vibes that you expect, and it really basks in the energy of that kind of really, really special light. I remember I was talking about, and you know, this could look like a werewolf, of course. And there's in one of, I don't remember which video, last week, something like that, I posted a video in which I was talking about the moon and the light of a full moon, and I was saying I used to track, you know, sometimes I used to track in the Alps, and when it's full moon, you can literally keep on tracking. You don't have to stop at night. Not that it's recommended, but there is enough light coming from a full moon that you can literally just see the path. So this is the Werewolf, a deck that is best used on a full moon, and I chose the Neon Moon Tarot. The next deck is a Grim Reaper, a deck that feels very final and unmovable. And I really had to go with the Crow's Magic Tarot by Londa Marks. This was a US Games deck from 25 years ago, published in 1998, that I was so lucky to have found a couple of weeks ago in one of the Facebook groups. So it's one of those decks that where it was in between in the production value with US Games. That I feel like the US Games decks from the 80s had that really beautiful battery feel, cardstock and finish. And then in the 90s, they tried something else that just didn't work. And this deck, unfortunately, is really sticky, really, really sticky. Although some of you actually recommended a Magician's Powder. So I found it on Amazon, I ordered it, but it's coming from the US. I think they may have had something similar in Australia, but was probably called in a different way. So I will try and use that and see whether the card actually stop gluing one to the other like that. Because it is a bit annoying. But the reason why I chose this deck for the Grim Reaper, so a deck that feels very final and unmovable, is that this deck doesn't pull any punches. And I know that people end up saying that for a lot of decks. Oh, this deck doesn't pull any punches, but it feels almost as if many of those decks are still negotiable. You know what I mean? When a deck, you know, tells you something, but you can still kind of work around it and find a positive spin. With this deck, you can't. It's not only that it doesn't pull any punches, it literally punches you in the face every single time, and it's just non-stop. I have been reading only 3 or 4 times with this deck, because it's one of those decks that you actually you cannot use every day. This is not for daily you know, like a spread of 3 cards or something like that, or 1 card pull or something like that, because this deck is just really out to get you. And it's one of those decks that, you know, it feels like, I don't know, it's almost made with the purpose of, you know, telling you things like they are, but in the most not unpleasant, but very direct. So it's not an unpleasant deck. I love it, and I'm so happy that I got it in my collection. But when I started using it, so my desire to acquire was definitely due to the aesthetics of it, and also the fact that this deck is so very famous and very, very beautiful. But I also recognize how powerful it is when I use it, and so I also recognize that it's not one of those decks that you want to use every day. So I was thinking, okay, who do I choose? You know, what deck do I choose when I talk about the Grim Reaper? And I'm like, well, this has got that kind of feel of the Grim Reaper, because it's really final, you know, and non-negotiable. It's like you cannot say, but perhaps I'll pull another additional card and see if I can find a positive spin to that. No. If you do that, if you pull an additional card to a card you already pulled, you will get even worse cards with this deck, and it happens all the time. So if you want something that really tells you things like they are, this is an absolute must. So this is the Grim Reaper, a deck that feels very final and unmovable, and I've chosen the Crow's Magic Tarot. Next up, we've got the Creature from the Black Lagoon, a deck that loves water but is not afraid of getting dirty. I had to go with the Tarot of the Drowning World, because these are the creators. This is an absolute joy of a deck, but it's also not everyone's cup of tea. I really draw your attention to the word drowning. So it's not drowned, it's drowning. So if I always specify when I talk about this deck, so I think that that's kind of a key to this deck. And by the way, I absolutely love the inside of the box. It's a tap box, which is not my favorite kind of, you know, box for a deck. And to be honest with you, it does give you a little issue when you put it back in. Sometimes you cannot, because it does have two flaps, and that's a bit of a problem, but that's okay. This is an absolute work of art, but as I said, it's not everyone's cup of tea because of the elements, because of the symbols, but because of the whole project. So I've actually followed the creators on Instagram, and I looked at what they were doing. So they went, whether it was in their own backyard or they went to a place where there was a swamp, okay, a small pond, let's call it that way. And what they've done, they put some barriers, containing barriers around an area about the size of a bathtub, let's put it this way. And this way it really functioned like a bathtub, because you had water inside and water outside. But that way, everything that they put inside that kind of a container or a bathtub was actually staying inside and wasn't just, you know, going all over the place. And then they started filling in this, you know, sort of a bathtub with all sorts of things like this. And the symbology is absolutely fantastic. It's also, in many, many cases, very, very intense, that it can get almost overwhelming. I completely understand that. And that's the reason why I said that this is not everyone's cup of tea, because of the many images, and also because it is suggestive of drowning, especially when there's people. In many other cases, you only have, let's say, plants, flowers, objects, like in this case. It's a peepish deck because the minors are, as you can see, this is the Two of Wands, and you got these kind of, they're not really wands, but I don't know how to call them. They look like pins, bowling pins, but they're not. Something similar. And they look like that. And or perhaps you have also animals in this case. But when you have people, it really does look like it is, you know, referring back to the word drowning. And this is even an actual bathtub in the shape of a coffin. And that's one of the reasons why I do believe that you need it. It grows on you. Let's put it this way. You need to get acquainted with this deck. You need to start using it perhaps, and you need to start, you know, try and find whether the energy that this deck conveys is the kind of energy that you may like. So this deck for me is the creature from the Black Lagoon, because if you remember the movie, it's not really pleasant, the creature from the Black Lagoon. As a matter of fact, it is very monsterish. And some of these are not pleasant to look at, or at least there is a really strong gut reaction when you actually look at the images. And I do believe that, you know, it's very conducive of a certain type of work, whether you use it for shadow work, for example, for introspective work, for personal growth, or simply because the guidebook, the companion book to this deck is an absolute joy. And it's very much one of my favorite study books, because it has got so much information. So whether you use it for shadow work or this kind of intense work, or you use it just because aesthetically you like it, you may like this kind of thing. So obviously it is artistic. There's no two ways around that. Obviously there's people that may not like this kind of art, absolutely, because we're all entitled to have our own opinion and taste, but it is artistic. So I think that, you know, I was kind of chuckling when I thought, okay, well, let's choose this deck for the creature from the Black Lagoon, because it is a watery kind of deck. It's got water in each and every card, but it is also very muddy and dirty sometimes, and it's got, you know, all of these elements that are rotting in some cases, as you can see here. So this is the creature from the Black Lagoon, a deck that loves the water but is not afraid of getting dirty, and this is the Tarot of the Drowning World. The next beloved monster deck is the Freddy Krueger. So it's a scruffy deck that has a terrifying sense of humor, and I had to go with my beloved Dylan Dog, I Tarocchi dell'Incubo deck. So Incubo means nightmare, so the Nightmares Tarot. Now Dylan Dog, if you're not familiar with the character, it still is actually still being published by Bonelli Editore from Milano, and it's a detective that is actually investigating the supernatural, and this was published first in the 80s. And so it is a beloved character. Everyone in Italy will know about Dylan Dog. It's one of those, I remember that it looked a lot like Rupert Everett, you know, when we first saw it. And there was a lot of us that had a crush on Dylan Dog back in the days. And I'm guessing, you know, if you're a teenager now in Italy and you're still reading Dylan Dog, you probably do also have a crush on Dylan Dog. So this deck is published by Los Carabaos back from the 90s. I think the original one, was from 1992, and then this one has been reprinted in 2017. So this is the 2017 edition. These are the backs. And his job was, he was literally investigating supernatural events or creatures. So obviously he had to deal with monsters all the time, as you can see. And it was a comic book. It was absolutely fantastic. All the mysteries were so interesting, so much so that when I was a teenager and I was taking one of these, you know, at school, and I was reading them when I had my recess in between classes. And I remember that I got to the point in which I was so into this story that I could not stop thinking about it, and because of that, in many cases I was really distracted. So I remember thinking at a certain point I had to get to some kind of a discipline to tell myself not to read it if I knew that after recess I had a test, especially math, because I just could not focus because I was really so much into this. I remember thinking I would rather be home and binge read on all of these comic books rather than being at school and take a math test. And so his name is Dylan Dog. He's you know, he lives in a very cute bow windows terraced house in London. Obviously he's got Groucho as which is, you know, he looks like Groucho Marx, of course, if you know the Marx brothers. And he looks exactly like him, and he's got a really wicked sense of humor, so he's his assistant. So the story is that Dylan is really sexy and everyone loves him, and he always ends up sleeping with the girl in each and every one of the stories. And but he always has to deal with all of these monsters, and it can get really dark, but it's also really, really funny and whimsical, because no matter what happens, you know, there are stories in which there's something really dark that happens. But because of his assistant being really whimsical and him being so matter of fact, you know, he's seen everything. It is kind of, it reminds me of Freddy Krueger. It reminds me of that kind of personality that, you know, it's supposed to be a sense of humor, but it's actually terrifying. And each and every card you can really tell. So there's hundreds, and I can tell you hundreds of publications, because they started back in the 80s, as I said, and they're still, nowadays, to this day, they're still releasing these comic books, I think once a month. And every time that I go to Italy, I buy the latest issue, so I've got a few. Because I really, really enjoy them. So this is the Freddy Krueger, and it's a scruffy deck that has a terrifying sense of humor, and I've chosen the Tarocchi dell'Incubo, so the Nightmare Tarot, published by Los Carabaos. And the next prompt of a beloved monster deck is Chucky. So the Chucky is a doll-like deck that may stab you in the back. like Chucky does. So if you're not familiar with Chucky, it's a horror movie with this doll. It's literally a toy, but it's really wicked. And obviously it's got a soul, not a soul, sorry, it comes alive. And you don't want it to come alive because when it does, it actually kills everyone. And I had to go with the Nicoletta Ceccoli tarot. I'm sorry, but this is really the Chucky of tarot decks. And I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. Nicoletta Ceccoli's artwork is really fantastic. She's from San Marino. So San Marino is an enclave. It's a country that is inside the country of Italy, but they speak Italian. In many cases, they probably also feel Italian. It is very interesting, and as a matter of fact, I can say that in February, when my husband and I will be going to Italy for his cancer treatment, but because we finally find a doctor that is, you know, fingers crossed, but it's for skin cancer. It's a treatment that we cannot get in Australia, so I could find a doctor that is willing to do that in Italy. So we're going there in February, and we are also going to San Marino, because in San Marino there is the biggest, and I mean the biggest, tarot and oracle and playing cards shop in the world. And by that I don't mean online. They also have an online store, of course. It's called Alida Store. They actually have a brick and mortar shop, and it is the biggest one in the world. Now that is a claim that I want to, you know, see whether it's true or not. But it will be my pleasure to go there and interview the owners, because they're absolutely lovely and they have some fantastic decks. Some of them really rare and hard to find, and they sell them for reasonable prices, and they also ship overseas with DHL. Now, going back to the Chucky. This is Chucky, okay? This is Chucky. To me, this is just the deck that it's got dolls. You know, it is doll-like. It's very pretty. There's a lot of toys, very sophisticated. The artwork is fantastic, as you want it to be, but there's always something really dark and I don't know, or something crawling on the walls as this one, or something really disturbing like this one. And honestly, even the expressions on the faces of the characters in the card, this is Stephen King's. This reminds me of the twin in The Shining. I mean, it's gotta be inspired, at least inspired by that for sure. And really, some cards are just, you know, let's put it this way. Some of these cards make you think that you don't necessarily want there to be a guidebook, if you know what I mean. Like, you look at the card and you kind of understand the meaning of it, and you think that you don't necessarily want to know the exact explanation of what happens, what is happening on the card. And that is Chucky for you. It's, I don't want to say creepy, but this is a deck that, not just aesthetically, this is a deck that can actually stab you in the back, in the sense that you can actually use it for shadow work. And I've seen a lot of people using this deck for inner child work. I actually do not recommend it for inner child, because inner child work, you actually have to be very kind and patient and respectful and mindful and grounded, and this deck is everything but. So I mean, some cards are beautiful. Look at this Temperance card. It's really, it's very sweet. That's what I mean to say. But then again, many of them are very disturbing. I mean, this is supposed to be the wheel of the year. And we got someone stabbed, you know, actually not even stabbed, because this is a pin, like a sewing pin. So anyway, it's a beautiful deck. I really love it. I really like it. I use it for dark kind of work, shadow work, rather than inner child work, because I do believe that inner child should be done with a very kind of, you know, light kind of deck. Or you can also do this. I mean, if you're an advanced reader and you feel like this deck is conducive for inner child wound healing, then you can do it, but just be very aware that this is not a deck that is conducive of the feelings, the healing feelings that you need to have while doing inner child wound healing. Now this is the Chucky, so a doll-like deck that may stab you in the back, and I chose the Nicoletta Cecoli Tarot. So the next beloved monster is the zombie. So the zombie is an airy deck that is hungry for brains, and I've chosen so this deck which I keep in this really cute bag, and it's a French deck. It's Le Tarot de Paysage Intérieur by Camille. So Camille is, I've told the story of this deck so many times before, so if you watch my channel you're probably tired of hearing it, but this was a very fortuitous purchase because Camille originally didn't intend to ship overseas, so she's based in France. And what happened was that so the shipping costs were not updated to ship to Australia. And what happened was that she actually reached out to me saying, "Look, I'm so sorry, but the shipping costs are not reflecting the shipping to Australia." So at first I had to cancel the order, and then I thought to myself, okay, well, even if the shipping is really high, I just need this deck. Because I'm an airy person, and I just need this deck. And I fell in love with the interpretation of the Three of Swords, which is absolutely fantastic. It doesn't have a pierced heart. It's actually something related to the mind, which is what I read, because I read numerologically, but also not even necessarily numerologically. But if you think about the alchemy of the miners, the suit of swords is related to air, which is related to the mind. So this is a very, what I feel is a very airy deck. The artwork is, to me, is absolutely fantastic. It's abstract, but it's very symbolic and very, very intense. It's actually impregnated with meaning. And I just loved it. So I really, I copped it. So, okay, I'm just going to pay for the shipping cost to Australia. But then what happened was that Camille sent it off, and for some reason it got back to her, because they thought that it was flammable material. Okay, that was obviously a mistake. So she contacted me. She said, "I'm so sorry, but it got back to me." And then I was like, I really want it. So she actually sent it back, and this time it made it to Australia, but it arrived here when I was away. And so what happened was that it got redirected to a depot. And finally, when I got back from my holiday, it was delivered, and that was mid-August, and I haven't stopped using it since, because this deck is absolutely fantastic. I really love it. It is an airy deck that is hungry for brains, because it really makes you think. Every single card is an absolute, it's food for thought. Let's put it this way. So I really love, looking at the cards, understanding why Camille has chosen this particular image to represent this particular card. And this is the reason why I bought this deck. So this is the Three of Swords, and I know that I've told this story so many times, but the Three of Swords for me is overthinking, because it's the growth of the three in the airy suit of the mind of the swords. So it's got nothing to do with a heart. I know that the traditional RWS depiction is a pierced heart, but it's not the way I read it. So I appreciate it when a deck gives me the possibility to look at the images and, connect with the images in a different way. And this is a person that has been thinking so much and so hard that they actually dig a hole. And that's exactly what I do when I'm overthinking and I'm worried. I actually pace around a table. And not so much so that I actually dig a hole, but, almost. And I love the fact that the swords are coming out of the mind or the head. And in this case, there's two swords pointing at the person and one pointing upwards, so inwards and outwards. And that's exactly what I feel when I think about the Three of Swords. That's a fantastic depiction of the card. So this is the zombie and airy deck that is hungry for brains, and I've chosen the Tarot de Paysage Intérieur by Camille. So if you want to translate it from the French, it translates as the Tarot of the Internal Landscape. And as all of these decks, I'll make sure, if they're not out of print, I'll make sure to put the link, if you want to buy them, in the description box below. So the next prompt is the Pennywise the Clown, a deck that is deceivingly whimsical but actually very intense. And I had to go with the Zix Arcana tarot cards. So this is an Australian creator, and it's quite a famous deck because it's been you may have seen it in Mary Tarot Tubers videos. It's a very whimsical deck, but it's deceivingly so, in the sense that when you actually start working with it, it's very powerful, and it's very intense. And that reminds me a lot of, you know, Pennywise the Clown is from either the book or the movie, whether you watch one of the or you read the other, but it's from Stephen King's It. And so if you haven't either watched or read the book, I highly recommend that you do, because the what do I want to say, the metaphors of that book, well, let's talk about the book, because this is a couple of different versions of the movie, and I actually like both of them. But let's talk about the book to talk about the thematics of the character. So Pennywise is a clown, but it's a really scary clown. It's a very evil clown, and what happens is that it feeds off people's fears, but more than fears, it actually feeds off people's misery. And that's what I really like about that book or that movie, because these kids that are scared by the clown, they are scared because they've been bullied, and they call themselves the losers. It's the losers club, and they have been bullied by everyone else in their classroom, or even the bigger boys in, you know, the later classrooms, and they have very tough situations back at home, whether they lost someone or perhaps they've been abused in some cases. So what I mean to say with that is it is incredibly compassionate. That book shows a very strong, suggests a very strong sense of hope, that even the last ones, even the ones that are, bullied by everyone, that they call themselves the losers, so they have not had the best start in life, even them, they can get so powerful and so strong, they can actually defeat evil, because that's what happened at the end, even though it takes their whole lives. And that is one of my favorite books. Okay, whether you like the genre, which is horror, obviously, or not, it is admittedly one of the most modern metaphors for society. And I really like reading it under this light. So going back to something a little bit more funny, because I went really dark there for a second. So this deck is a joy to look at. It's pink. These are the backs. It's got a really fantastic cardstock. It's one of the cardstocks that it's papery to the touch, but very silky as well. And when you do like this with the cards, it makes that kind of sound that I really like the Amber and Aura Tarot, for example. So it's the tactile feel and the tactile experience is very good. The aesthetics are amazing. It's got a lot of really bright colors, colors that are, almost clashing in their vibrancy and saturation. The only thing that I don't understand is why some of the suits are peepish and some are not. But so be it. So this is the Six of Cups, and to me that's actually scenic, because it does remind me of, a past in which I was a kid and I was playing with the dolls and the rainbow. I mean, it does have that kind of nostalgia feel to it. Definitely is scenic with the Seven of Cups. And then you go to the Three of Wands and you're like, yeah, I can sort of get it. I mean, of course, you've got the sea and the clouds in the background, and you feel that need to get out there and do something, but it's not necessarily illustrated. So I don't know, it's kind of semi-scenic, I guess. Some cards are semi-scenic, sometimes they are very scenic, sometimes they're not scenic at all. But I really like it. It's a very beautiful deck. It is for all of these creatures that are a little bit whimsical when you look at them, of course. They are weird enough to be whimsical, but not weird enough to be weird, to be creepy, let's say. But when you start using them, so this is the 5 of wands, for example, and I get that there's this kind of, you know, competition and fighting and everything, but it's not necessarily scenic. So I was saying, this is so cute. So this is the Pennywise, because the clown for me, because it is deceivingly whimsical. So when you look at it like that, you know, you chuckle because of all the characters, as I said before. But it's actually very intense, very intense. When you start using it, you will see that it's one of those decks that it goes really deep, and I mean really deep. And it's also, you can see that from, for example, there is an additional card. It's called the Patron, and obviously that's you, because that's a mirror and you look at yourself reflected in that. So it really brings you inside the card, and you'll find that's not the only card that does that. There's other cards that really invite you in. And because of the, I mean, it's whimsical, but at the same time, it is a bit disturbing. And I don't mean it in a bad way, because I actually like this deck. It's just that I recognize that there is some kind of intensity to it. That's all I'm saying. So this is, and I love this deck card. It's actually really, really cool. Magician. So this is the Pennywise Clown, and it's a deck that is deceivingly whimsical, but actually very intense. And I've chosen the Six Arcana. And the last prompt is the Mummy. So it's a deck that is covered in many layers. And I've chosen the Tarot of Oppositions. This is by Pierluca Zizzi and Michele D'Aloisio, published by Lo Scarabeo. It's one of those publications by Lo Scarabeo of, let's say, a luxurious kind of production, because it's got a 2-part box like this. What I really like about this deck is that I haven't actually found a deck so far that shows you not necessarily the upright and the reverse meaning of the cards in the same deck, because there is a tarot which is called Tarot of Revelation, or Revelations Tarot. Sorry, I don't remember the title. I don't have that deck, which does have the upright and the reverse symbols in the same card. But this deck actually shows you the light and the shadow meaning. So in some cases you will say that's the same thing, and I would agree to a certain extent. So the 5s, for example, some of the negative cards and some of the Suit of Swords cards, for example, they're actually positive when we read them in the reverse. So obviously the 10 of Swords will be positive because the swords are actually lifting from the body. Now, depending on the depiction, of course, but generally speaking, all the 5s are positive when you read them on the reversed. The 8 of Swords, you will see here, for example, of course, the person is in a cage of their own making, but in here, they finally understood that they could actually get away, and they freed themselves. So there is this very specific kind of looking at the card and reading the card from a light point of view or from a shadow point of view. And therefore, what I highly recommend is to actually shuffle this deck in this way. So you actually twist it, because this way you can be sure that you're going to read also the reversals. Now, this is not for everyone, in the sense that I understand that there might be someone not reading reversals. I read reversal yes and no, in the sense that I know the meanings of the reversed or reverse meanings of the cards. And when, for example, there is a very simple spread that doesn't necessarily have positions or meanings in the spreads that require a different kind of interpretation of the card. So, for example, if in your spread you have a card that refers to obstacles, of course, you will best read the card as if it was showing you the shadow interpretation of the card itself, and not necessarily the upright or the light meaning of the card. So that's how you read reversals. I believe that all of the cards contain in themselves all of the meanings, so including the reversed meanings as well. But you need to access that kind of reversed meaning depending on the position of the card and depending on the cards around it, for example, depending on what your question is. And, you know, there's so many ways of reading reversals on top of everything that I think I actually posted a video on just 5 main ways of reading reversals. And it is one of the things that I actually teach during my courses for beginners and also intermediates, because I believe that you need to remind yourself of certain things when you're doing an intermediate course, because you don't necessarily practice too much on certain things after you are a beginner. And so you tend to lose. If you don't practice something, you tend to lose it. I really like this Hermit card. So I'm sorry, it's very glossy, so it catches the light, and I'm trying to find an angle to show you the card without shining everything. So this is the Hermit card, and obviously this is the upright, the character we're always used to see. So that's, you know, the person, the hermit, that going with the light in front of them, trying to find something, searching. But the reversed, the light is off. And the person is not, it's almost covering themselves and it's looking at us sideways. There is something that is actually going on here, in the sense that he's not even holding the light anymore. The light is not in front of them, it's past them. This is a person that has already done a research or a search of their soul, and what they have found they did not like. So I really like the way in which you can read this deck, the interpretation of the cards, the kind of work you can do with this deck. And that's the reason why I chose it for, you know, a representation of the mummy, because the mummy to me, you know, it's covering all those bandages and gauze, and this is to me the layers that actually compose a deck. And there are so many that you can actually read in this one. So this is, as I said, the mummy, a deck that is covered in many layers. And this was the last of the prompts of this VR. So as I said, this VR is called #BelovedMonstersDecks. And as I said at the beginning of this video, I'm actually going to name or invite a few of the channels that I like to, if they want to pick up this challenge. So first Robyn from Robyn's Reflections, then Marine from The Waves of Your Soul, then Sharon from Trio of Witches Tarot, then Annette from A Project Refined Life, and finally Benny from The Fool's Apprentice. Now guys, if you want to pick up this challenge, tag me please, because I would love to see your choices for these beloved monsters. But if you don't want to, if you, for whatever reason, you're too busy, this is not one of those Facebook challenges in which you have to do it, otherwise something will happen. It's not like that. I personally really hated that. So this is really just an invitation, and that's it for today. So thank you so much for staying with me till the end of this video. More to come. Have a great day.